Welcome to the Conduit Deeper podcast, a podcast that takes a deep dive into the details that surround our current sermon series, from current events to fascinating finds to conversations that take us deeper into the Word. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome to our Deeper podcast. My name is Mo, executive pastor at Conduit Church, joined with our lead pastor, Darren Tyler, for what has been a couple of weeks away for myself.
Yeah. You were sunning. What were you doing on the beach? What do you do on the beach?
Nothing.
Yeah. Ugh.
There's nothing. There's sun involved, lots of sun.
Yeah.
Just the sound of the waves alone resets my soul. Just staring at it.
And does Jen just sit there too? Does she just sit there?
Sits
Oh
there.
gosh.
You know, we read, we'll listen to podcasts and music, and we'll take lovely strolls up and down the beach, just doing a lot of nothing.
I'm glad you enjoy that part like that.
I do.
It sounds like it is a nightmare for me. Like when we go to the beach, it took about 10 years for my wife to become okay with this. Honestly, I don't know that she ever became okay with it. I just think she just got tired of me being annoying because I'm just bored sitting there. So we have a little strategy where we'll start the morning together, and then I'll just disappear, and then
Go rent a fishing boat or something?
yeah, pier fish, hit the water, just do anything but just sit there, and then I'll find her. I mean, she'll sit there from sun up to sundown.
I mean, you don't sit there and try to build a sandcastle or something?
No, nothing like that. No, I'm bored within minutes of being there. Like I'm just bored.
Well, that's kind of the point for us
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed that.
for a week, just to do nothing. But one thing that kind of happened was kind of cool. I didn't expect this. This was a happy accident. Is that we were at Pensacola Beach, and apparently the Blue Angels are based out of Pensacola. And
Yeah.
so the Blue Angels planes were doing a rehearsal like right in front of us.
How loud was that?
Incredibly.
Yeah.
It was so awesome. I mean, it was just like you could feel all of it. It was amazing.
Do people just like come running out of their condos and like gather in crowds? And interesting.
Everybody's out there just oohing and eyeing, and it was amazing.
Yeah, I guess
That was so cool.
I feel like I've been to Pensacola, but apparently not when that's going on.
Yeah.
Huh.
No, it was great.
Well,
Great. It was good to be back. You had some time with our good friends Fuad and LaFleur.
Yeah, it was like International Week
Yeah.
on the podcast. Haiti and Lebanon both being represented.
Yeah, which was really, really good. Those were very insightful, and anytime we can have those guys on is a good thing.
Yeah.
Kind of get us to zoom out a little bit. But today we're going to zoom back in to the Field Guide to a Fallen World. This is our series through the book of Peter, 1 Peter, 2 Peter. This past Sunday, 1 Peter chapter 4, Armed and Dangerous. What a scandalous title.
Right.
Armed and Dangerous.
I guess I was feeling spicy, as Micah would say.
You mentioned, having your gun beside you
Yeah, well, apparently that was more controversial than I had thought.
at night. Shotgun? Is it shotgun or pistol?
The shotgun's under the bed, pistols beside the bed.
There you go.
You know what I mean? We call the shotgun the street sweeper.
Okay, yeah.
But,
Did you get feedback on that?
Well, just a couple of people, because I said, I thought I only said it in the 5 p.m., but apparently that turning your head into a canoe.
You said it in all three.
Did I say it in all three?
Absolutely.
Oh, man.
That's kind of like one of your lines.
Well, yeah, anyway,
A little too graphic.
I don't know. I mean, I felt like it was, because it is what's going to happen. Like if, I've done enough handgun training that look, I'm not doing it for sport, but if someone walks into my home intent on harming my children,
Okay, well,
I'm not looking to just, hit him in the knee.
this is a little bit of a left turn from where we were going to go, but since you brought it up, I want to talk about this because are you following what's happening in Aurora, Colorado?
Yes.
So in Aurora and what's the other Colorado city? Maybe it's all in Aurora.
I think it's all Aurora.
There is what seemingly is a Venezuelan gang.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how many, but it's seemingly hundreds, if not.
Even if it's just dozens.
Let's just say it's dozens. But it sure seems like there's more than that.
Yep.
That have invaded specifically Aurora, Colorado, and are taking over apartment complexes even this past week, there was ring cam footage through the suburbs of Aurora, which Aurora is there's parts of Aurora that are, I mean, it's a wealthy town.
It's like one of the suburbs. It's not,
Yeah, it's the burbs, but specifically because there's a lot of military there. And so there's probably like every major town, there's the wealthy side and the not so wealthy side. But they're just there's Venezuelan immigrants. I don't know what else to call them. Illegals. Yeah. They've come over illegally.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's illegal immigrants. Yeah. That's
illegal immigrants they're armed, like with machine guns, walking down the suburbs into people's garages and taking whatever they want.
Yeah. In
the middle of the night. So one of the conversations online right now is, what would you do? What would you do? And every state, every town kind of has their own laws on how you can or can't engage.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking if that happens in the state of Tennessee, I'm thinking that they're not walking out.
Yeah. No, I would say if you're going to be that kind of nonsense, it would not go over so well in Tennessee for sure. Like, and to be clear, these are criminals. It's not their ethnicity; it's the criminality that we're talking about.
Absolutely.
My next door neighbor Miguel came here from Mexico. He came legally. He has built a business. He provides jobs. Like, love Miguel. And he would do the same thing I would do if you tried to break into Miguel's house. We have a 0% tolerance for nonsense. And, look, it's like a life insurance policy. We pay for it. Don't ever want to use it, ever. We'll 99%, never need it. But when you do, so that it's interesting that now, so I've not seen any of the online.
It's alarming footage.
Yeah.
It's alarming.
Yeah, I've seen that footage. I've not seen the online commentary. Are there like woke people wringing their hands over?
No, that's just it. There is no discussion or conversation.
Oh, because it hurts their narrative
from what I'll call the far left.
Yeah,
like they're woefully absent from the conversation because it's like, hey, I mean, are you seeing this? Like this. Yeah. This can't be allowed.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah,
So there's been conversation like, okay, if this happened in the state of Nebraska, or if this happens in Ohio, or if this happened in Florida, or if this happened in Texas, it's happening in Colorado in droves. There's call for National Guard in that area because they're just taking over parts of the city.
Yeah. Well, and they've come from a lawless country that, by the way, Exhibit A on socialism doesn't work. Venezuela was one of the most promising economies in the Americas, right? The developing, and Hugo Chavez steps in, turns it socialist. He takes over the oil companies, and now it's a failed state, like of socialism, totalitarianism, ruled by criminal elements with it. And the fact that they're coming across the border. It's the weirdest thing because this is not a controversial idea that we should know who is coming into our nation. And, to put a biblical lens on this, if you look to the Old Testament, God had and does have a heart for the immigrant. He has a heart for the poor, for the oppressed. We as a church 100% share that heart because it's God's heart. And if you look at throughout the Old Testament, I'm not going to, we weren't planning this, so I don't have these fresh on my mind. But there are basically 7 things that God instructs Israel with welcoming in the immigrants. And one of them is they learn the language. They learn the culture. They adapt. It was basically saying you adapt your culture to Israel, not Israel adapt their culture to you. And far left elements, in progressive Christians as well, will say that we have to have open borders because God would have open borders, right? That's what they would say. That's what they do say. And then they completely skip the rest of it, which is you need to assimilate into the Jewish culture instead of the Jewish culture assimilating into yours. And every time that doesn't happen, every time Israel violates that, it ends extraordinarily poorly whether it's with pagan worship, with criminal elements as well, coming in, Baal worship, sacrificing babies, that is all allowing their culture to infiltrate the Jewish culture as opposed to the other way around. So I am 100% in favor. Fuad Masri is an immigrant that came to the United States with his family and has assimilated into the culture instead of forcing his culture on us. Now, is he still Lebanese? Absolutely. Do they have great food at his house? 150%, But you heard him on our podcast. He speaks like an American because he's an American. And by the way, that's what they would expect you to do in Uganda. They don't want me to go over there and bring American culture. In fact, they don't want us bringing American culture because what they experience American culture right now is us forcing down their throats the American idea, at least what the government idea of American culture, which is to force down, you got to change the definition of marriage. You got to change the definition of sexuality. They're like, you can pack your crap and go home. Don't bring that to us.
There was a little clip going around a couple weeks ago during the DNC of Steve Cortez. Do you know Steve Cortez?
I do not.
Politician. He was making an incredible point. He found a Venezuelan migrant walking around the streets of Chicago.
Oh, wait, I did see this, but I can't remember it, so refresh me. I remember laughing really hard.
Oh, yeah. So he finds this guy walking around the streets of Chicago and says, hey, would you like to go to the Democratic National Convention? And he said, sure. So he takes him to try to get him into the DNC at all of the different gates, all of the different ways to get into the building. And obviously was denied because he had...
Yeah. He should have been.
He has no license. He has no paperwork, has no identification, has not registered, none of those things, and got turned away at every stop at the DNC. And obviously, he's proving a point in highlighting the irony that,
the hypocrisy.
The hypocrisy of not even able to get into the Democratic National Convention, yet willfully able to just walk across the border.
Yeah, I mean, this problem could be solved if the billions of dollars that have been spent on nonsense were just spent on beefing up the court system, beefing up the process for legal immigration, beefing it up. Because I have friends in Uganda, law-abiding, God-fearing, contributing members of society that would love to come to the United States. We tried this with one of the Matali boys to come and work for us over a couple of years. Went through the process that's supposed to be the process, and it, like any government process, it's bogged down in bureaucracy. He is denied.
Jeez.
But if he just got a flight, which is happening all over the place right now, if you can get to Mexico, you can get into America because those doors are open. So we are literally rewarding illegal behavior and punishing legal behavior. And human nature is human nature, especially when you're scared, especially when Venezuela is a great example because there are people there that are desperate, that are good people, that need safety. But we have no way to know who's who because we've just opened the back door. I lock my back door every night because if you're coming in my house, I want to know who you are and that you're friendly. I don't just people don't just come into my house, out on Reynolds Road and open my fridge and take my stuff if I don't know who they are. That's just common sense. And so I guess that's the thing, and this is going to be a terrible segue, but that's literally what 1 Peter is about. This is just a common sense thing. Like, love your wife, be good to your kids, common sense. And there has been a vacuum of common sense in our culture because I touched on this on Sunday, but it starts with a therefore, and the theology nerds all know that you see a therefore in the Bible, read the verses before to see what it's there for. And that is 100% true. But there's a deeper layer of that. And the deeper layer is God is ultimate reality. We, love is the supreme ethic of the universe. Therefore, live like this. But if you don't have a therefore, so this is what I touched on Sunday, but secular humanists, atheists, if you live with a worldview of that evolution is true, that we are here because of a cosmic accident, then your therefore is let those Venezuelan gangs go because they happen to be stronger because they have the guns and the strong eat the weak. Therefore, right? So if the strong eat the weak, therefore, then that's the whole premise of evolution, the whole premise of a secular humanist, is that we are here as a cosmic accident and that the strong survive, the strong eat the weak. So therefore you should let them conquer. You should, because there's no therefore that says you shouldn't. There, you know, if you, God is the only therefore. So if God is the ultimate reality, if Jesus Christ is the Son of God, born, you know, from a virgin, crucified, buried, resurrected on the third day, he is ultimate reality. Therefore, we should love one another, right? Therefore, because all life is valuable. Therefore, right? That is the premise of, or it's why I think it's why the common sense thing is gone, because we don't have a therefore in our culture. Or let me phrase it: we have a therefore, and it's the therefore that the strong eat the weak, and anything else is a violation of that. And so the nonsense that we're seeing is the intellectual dishonesty.
But the nonsense hasn't always been there, right? I mean, these are conversations that our grandparents were having in the 1950s.
Oh gosh, I can't even imagine my granddad being alive today with a male dressing up as a female and competing in sports. He would have an aneurysm.
Right. I mean, I think back to, you know, I mean, the 50s aren't that long ago, but also 70 years ago, which is wild to think about.
Well, I need a minute to recover from that.
Feelings. You know, because I think of shows like Leave It to Beaver and the Andy Griffith Show, in these portrayals of Americana in the 50s, these you know, Mayberry towns, these small, friendly American values,
right? Family
oriented, family focused, keep the bad guys away.
Yeah.
Like
even mom and dad in a married couple, they slept in separate beds on the show because
too risque.
Scandalous. Yeah, in the same bed. Like we didn't know how they got. No. Leave It to Beaver. Like we didn't know how he got here. Mom and dad are sleeping in separate beds.
So I guess my point is it's this. There's not always been nonsense. So the needle's moved.
Yeah, I mean it's Romans 1, right? Like that is a progression, not a moment. Like it's a journey that spirals downward. When you start with rejecting God, there is a cultural downward spiral with it.
Yes, but we would term it as a downward spiral, obviously based upon morality and ethics. But the left would say that it's expressive, it's progressive. We are getting better. We are being more affirming. We are more accepting. Like how do we navigate some of these word plays on how culture is perceived when there's right and wrong, and then there's good and evil.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that the Bible tells us, right? Woe to those who call good evil and evil good.
And and it's just been over just a couple of generations. I mean, we're talking about, at least I'm talking about, like my grandparents were alive in the 50s having these conversations, right? And my parents were born in the 50s. So just a couple of generations removed from what is seemingly what we would deem now as a bit of insanity.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the line that I quoted from on Sunday was, you know, Jordan Peterson talking about when you bend reality to your will, it doesn't work. It will snap back on you. And, you know, Peterson is at best an agnostic, but he is pointing out a very truism, which is you don't get to bend reality. It's like one of those rubber band, you know, things at the gym that you're using for workout. You bend it too far, it will snap back and hurt you and everyone around you. He actually goes on to say in his clinical practice that he has never seen anyone, anytime, anywhere get away with anything. It always comes back. And he's like, it's incontrovertible in his 30 years of practice, however many years he's practiced, it always comes back. You know, and what does the Bible say? Your sin will find you out. God hates sin because of what it does to us. He didn't make this, that was what I was trying to get across on Sunday. He did not give us a set of busy work. Like this is not me writing on a chalkboard, you know, I will be nice to my neighbor. I will be nice to like just to keep me busy. Like he gave us these things because it's reality. I've got a well house on the property and some little issues with pressure. And so I reached in yesterday to touch it, and I mean, I literally shocked the absolute crap out of my hand.
What did you do?
My whole body. Well, there's apparently a negative wire crossed, ungrounded or something. I didn't know. I mean, it lit me up. Like, I'm surprised I didn't wake up with a perm. But
Oh my word.
But here's the thing, like that the ultimate reality is that electricity does not work in a human body. That's not God being a buzzkill. That's just reality. And if I keep touching that, bending reality wins. I don't. And at the end of the day, I love Henry Cloud's definition of a fool. And a fool definition is here's the truth, but bends the truth to try to fit my preference as opposed to bending my preference to fit the truth. My life has to adapt to the truth. A fool says that I'm going to adapt the truth to fit my life. And that doesn't work.
I'm pontificating here because I'm hung up on, I mean, yes, we live in a Romans 1 world in sin, in Genesis 3 and all those things. I've taken over humanity, but also I'm just thinking specifically with America, the de-evolution of ideas in just a couple of generations. I can't help but keep going back to what Yuri Bezmenov said. We've talked about this before, but it's been a while. And he continues to be proven right over and over again. He's a former KGB agent that defected to Canada specifically and became a professor. But he talked about one of their tactics, one of the Russian tactics to undermine the West was this idea of ideological subversion.
Yeah.
Basically planting an idea that leads to some sort of shift in their political, social, and cultural values. And that it's a long game. They anticipate 20 to 40 years for it to take effect over time. And it's promoting specifically promoting moral relativism, and skepticism towards traditional values, general delusionment with an existing system, just basically placing these question marks.
Yeah.
Starting with colleges and universities in the 50s and 60s. You play that out over 40 years, now almost 60 years.
Right.
And here we are. We have a complete, almost not a complete, but close to a complete collapse of these moral ethics that folks would have viewed America as the standard for.
Right.
So it feels, while all of those things are in place as far as, again, Romans 1, Genesis 3, all of those are true, but also makes me wonder if there's a bit of a undermining that's maybe come from other countries infiltrated into ideas infiltrated into our republic, Marxist ideas, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, no question that practically speaking, the way it has worked out, where it's being worked out, that is how it has been planted in our society, even up to the last election. It's well known now, but of the 20 whatever Christian groups on Facebook, 19 of them were actually fake ones from a bot farm in Eastern Bloc Europe. Financed
Moldova, right?
Yeah, financed by the Russians, financed specifically and led by the guy that is now in charge of the Wagner Group, that they just replaced the guy they evaporated. They replaced him with the guy that actually led that disinformation campaign. But if you, like we, believe in an unseen realm and spirits that have been around for generations, been around for millennia, then the spirits do what they do, which is use a human mechanism to implement a spiritual war.
Yeah, it's good.
And so that tactic is not unlike what you would have experienced, say, like in ancient Rome, which was a totalitarian idea, and they would force language, force morality, which is what you see here in 1 Peter 4, was that they heaped abuse and insults on the Christians, not because they proclaimed Christ, but because they refused to participate in the orgies. They refused to participate because what Rome was saying is, this is good. You're saying it's evil. We say it's good, and heaping abuse on it. But it was government planted, government enforced, and then humanity does what humans do, which is gravitate towards evil and not good. But taking that lens, it's not like spirits are not demonic, whatever you want to call them. They don't get born, live and then die. They're here. They've been here. They were created, but they still exist, and they at some point will be locked up in a bottomless pit, a lake of fire. Revelation tells us. But until then, it's still happening. And by the way, 1 Peter 5, field guide for a fallen world. Beware of your adversary, the devil, who's roaming around like a roaring lion. And one of the things that a roaring lion does is blend in with its surroundings. I mean, I shared it, I think, on the podcast, but we were in Africa. It was 2 years ago, or I guess a year and a half ago. And I mean, we're literally in knee-high grass. We are inches from a lion and I'm standing out, like looking out the window. I'm like looking out the top and taking a picture of the lion in front of us. And suddenly this lioness stands up, and I could have pet her. And nobody saw her. Nobody. So when he says, beware, your adversary like a roaring lion, as he's blending in with his surroundings, we've got to be very aware that what's happening right now in our culture is our roaring lion is blending in with our culture. We've got to be very vigilant.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you bring that up, because not only is it blending into the culture, I think it's blending into the church.
Yes.
And you can see the progression over the past 70 years. From, the 50s was very evangelical.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways.
Yeah. Billy Graham, Oral Roberts,
Yes.
Tent revivals.
I mean, that was a linchpin in the independent fundamental Baptist background that I came from.
Those are your people.
Absolutely. I mean, these ideas of tent revivals was still a thing in the 80s when I was growing up as a kid.
And by the way, some of those guys are still hanging on, man. Like the idea of a revival, if there's not a tent, it ain't a revival, right? If you got some sloppy, sweaty guy toweling his head, yelling at you, you're not in revival.
Which was, made for a great band name too, the Big Tent Revival.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Shout out Steve Wiggins, man. Yeah. He's still worship pastor in Memphis.
But the point is like in the 50s and 60s, there was this focus, this urgency for evangelism across America.
Yeah.
That seemingly faded, died off, was relegated to the back row for this next concept that kind of worked its way in of being seeker sensitive, seeker friendly. Maybe talk through that, because I was 10 years younger. I was a decade younger than you during that time, so I don't have. I was in those seeker friendly youth groups at that time.
Yeah,
you were a little older and maybe had a better front row seat to kind of what those conversations were and why that became so popular in America in the mid 90s. This idea of seeker friendly.
Yeah, I mean it's so funny because the thing about a zeitgeist is you really don't know it's happening until it's happened. Like you're in the middle of it. And it seemed to us, and I, full disclosure, I just came back from spending a couple of days with 12 pastors in Dallas. That's why I was out last week, just for a couple of days. And the largest church represented was 24,500. The smallest was 150. This just faithful guy named Hector in L.A. Most of us were the size of Conduit Church, which is around 2,500, I guess. I can see why people do membership, by the way, because you can actually get a number. Mo does what he calls the signs of life. So if these 4 things are happening, then you are a regular attender at Conduit Church. And by the way, regular attender by national definition now is 1.7 times a month.
Yeah, which is a bit of a drop off even from COVID. I think it used to be 2.4.
Yeah. So quote unquote regular church attendance has gone from regular attending to once a month, basically, once and a half, so you're here every 3 weeks. But one of the things they cited was a study that a guy named Aaron Renn, R-E-N-N, he's a thinker, an intellectual. He writes for an organization called First Things. You've probably seen some of those pieces floating around from that organization. But he has, and like any type of trying to rejigger history, trying to figure out what happened. These are broad, sweeping statements. Like, it does not include what happened with the Jesus Revolution in Los Angeles in the early 70s. In fact, that revolution has still given birth to churches that are still exploding today. But what he was saying was that in those days in the 80s, which is true, the church, in the culture at large, there was a positive view of the church. You might not have been a Christian. You might not have wanted to be a Christian. But you at least thought, okay, that's a church on the corner. That's a positive thing. That is a positive gain for our community. So what was born out of that, according to Wren, and it seems anecdotally to be very accurate, was we want to reach as many people as possible. So we went from tent revivals with, a lot of sweating and wiping of towels.
Yeah, and a lot of hard truth being shouted from stage. I mean, that was the days of the, hail and brimstone type teaching.
Yeah.
Repent now.
Yeah. And so when we get to the 80s and then into the 90s, it was we still evangelism, but what it basically was saying now, I'm putting words in Aaron's mouth, but that the Sunday gathering is now an evangelistic outreach. In the old days, we had a tent revival, but now it's Sunday. And I remember my former pastor, Willie George, good man, good Bible teacher. When they would ask him about, when do you do special events to reach people? We have a special event every Sunday. It's called church. So church on Sundays became an evangelistic opportunity. And what that meant was no deep teaching. It meant we didn't, and this became, like nobody sat down like in some council and voted, this is what we're doing. It just sort of happened.
Yeah.
That we were going to no longer say things that were controversial. Because again, somebody driving by a church might stop in and we want to make sure they have the opportunity to hear the gospel. Okay, the goal, very noble. Okay, we want everybody to have a chance to hear. But as Francis Chan says, our greatest danger in Christianity is not failure, it's succeeding at things that don't matter. So that gave birth to the seeker-sensitive movement. So guys like Rick Warren, who, by the way, godly man. You can say what you want about him, but I don't know anybody else on the planet that literally sold so many books that he gave the entirety of his salary back to his church and still launched. I mean, still to this day in East Africa, they know Rick Warren because he got George Bush on a plane with Bono to help them fight the AIDS epidemic. So you can blast him all you want. And, his method was well-intentioned. I think it was very wrong. And the fruit of it. So the difference, say, between the fruit of the Jesus Revolution was that gave birth to churches and pastors that just blown up all over the world, and they held to the gospel. But by treating Sunday like that in the positive world, what ends up happening is there's no discipleship happening. We're going to get around to that. We're going to do it in small groups, whatever. But this just never happens. So the actual deep meat of the word is not being communicated, and slowly over time, the culture, as that was being birthed into the church, the culture began to switch. Bill Clinton is president. Monica Lewinsky, she got a blue dress. I mean, there's weird stuff going on, which is, you're now in the 90s, so you're a teenager. And and you had a great youth pastor. You had a great, and all of us did. But I remember this because in that seeker-sensitive model gave birth to a bunch of people that didn't end up getting deep teaching, didn't know. I mean, I remember I represented bands that didn't know the difference between Jonah and Noah. Like Job, like, I don't know, it's just one of the J ones. But it's not their fault, they just didn't know it. But so the neutral world in the culture was, we don't view the church as positive or negative, we just don't view it at all. And so what ends up happening in that movement, according to Wren, and I think accurately, guys like Tim Keller, instead of inviting people into church to engage in the church, they decided we're going to go into the world and engage the culture. Good idea, again. And you would hear words like winsome became one of the words that Keller specifically was famous for. And again, just like Warren, I'm not going to badmouth Keller. Some of the most thought-provoking Christian wisdom, C.S. Lewis style, came from Tim Keller. Do I wish he had done things differently in the last years of his life? Oh man, do I. But he was engaging the culture. And so by engaging the culture, like he's in New York, he's in a totally, like if you listen to his sermons from the 90s, you'd think, gosh, that sounds like he's preaching today, because whatever starts in LA or New York eventually gets to the rest of the world, right? So he's Engaging the culture, and the language that you hear from them is that they would coddle left and punch right. So cultural engagement, man, if you've got a bunch of people in the culture that are seeking, we're not going to just bash progressive left wing. We're going to be very kind with that. But in order to get them to like me, I'm going to make sure that the stuff that is wrong with on the right side of the aisle or conservative ideology, I'm going to make sure that I punch that because I want the people on the left to know that I see them. So coddle left, punch right, winsome. And so that was, according to Wren, somewhere like 1994 to around 2014, when the world changed to a neutral view of the Bible or of the church to a negative view. So now a pastor no longer is looked at as an asset to the community. A pastor is no longer viewed as a good thing, but a negative thing. And, you know, there are people out there like Julie Roys who make a living, hopefully a meager living, but a living on making sure that anytime a pastor ever makes a mistake ever, that it is blasted all over the place. And the old saying still stands, and that is that the newspapers do not write about planes that land safely. They only write about the crash. And there are not that many crashes, so they get headlines, and it sounds like planes are crashing all over the place. That's not true, but that's what the culture has now seen. So now how do we engage in a culture that now views us in a completely negative sense?
Yeah, maybe
is the
not
question.
Even, yeah, I mean, negative and perhaps even perceived as a threat.
Hostile. Yeah, like hostile towards us, which is, by the way, 1 Peter, 2 Peter. That's exactly why I was, so, we'd sensed that we needed to go through this. And so I ended up in Dallas, and I was so grateful in many ways. Like, oh, goodness. I didn't know how to describe it, but like we were already doing this as a church, which is we're in a different world. And this world now, there are still seekers out there. Okay, there's the whole idea of seeker-sensitive. There's seekers, but they're seeking who is going to speak for my family. Who's going to tell my son that he can't be a girl? Like who is going to be there for me? And these are non-Christians, right? And you and I have both experienced that anecdotally. We've had conversations with people in our church family that are here now because they just wanted somebody to have some common sense. Like who's going to deal with reality? And the Bible is ultimate reality. And so, by the way, the idea now is what is the new strategy? Was it successful, those other strategies? I would argue that the seeker-sensitive model was in fact not successful. That it was we should have always been doing what we're doing right now, which is speaking and explain the truth clearly, explain the truth boldly, explain the truth unapologetically.
I think one of the consequences from that era is a deficit in biblical literacy.
100%. You don't know ultimate reality if you don't know the Bible.
Yeah.
You don't have a therefore.
Yeah, exactly. So those that were maybe teenagers, middle school, high school, in those seeker-sensitive days of the church, specifically, they were coming for the rock wall. They were coming for the concert.
Yeah.
They were coming for the basketball courts, of which I participated in all of those things.
Yeah.
And those aren't in of themselves a bad thing. But when that becomes the main thing in discipleship, biblical teaching is a back seat. The chickens have come home to roost now.
Yeah.
20 years later, 25 years later, and there is a deficit in biblical literacy. And so now those young men and young women are they're moms and dads. They're husbands and wives, and they're trying to lead their family, and they don't have a biblical foundation in a world that discounts the Bible and views Christianity as a threat in of itself, which you put all of those ingredients together in a big stew, you've got a mess.
100%. It's like things that you and I would have taken for granted that is just obvious and common sense. For instance, we were joking that, Mr. and Mrs. Cleaver slept in separate beds. There's a generation now that was raised in church maybe and genuinely doesn't know that sex outside of the covenant of marriage is a sin, and it's a sin for a reason. Like it's not, they don't know that ultimate reality says that the reason that and you could even re-engineer this chemically speaking, the oxytocin, it's the attachment chemical. And whoever is your first, you have an attachment to that is God-given, it's so God-given that it's chemically there. And so you give yourself chemically to multiple partners, and that attachment weakens with who you end up marrying. So, but if you've never been told that before, and now you've been discipled by a culture that says, it's a given now that if you wait till you're married to get, to have sex, it's like you're made fun of, it's treated hostilely. So much so that, again, young people growing up in some churches would never even think that it was wrong. It's brand new information to them. And that is as basic, like, it wasn't that people in my age group didn't sin. It's at least we knew it was a sin, that it was missing the mark, that it wasn't God's design, that I was violating his design for my life. I at least knew that. But this world, they don't know that. And that's why we have to explain the truth clearly, boldly, and unapologetically. This is true. This is, when I grabbed a hold of that pipe in the well house and it lit me up, okay? There wasn't me going, I apologize for having to tell you this, but that, the electricity will kill you. Like, I don't know. No, unapologetically, don't do that. You'll die if you do that. That's physiology. It's biology coming together. It's ultimate reality. We as Christians in this world, whatever this strategy is going to be called, I would suggest to you is not anything new. It's just the book of Acts.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was getting ready to say is like it's not going to be a new strategy. It's going to be a cycle back to the old strategy.
Yeah, it worked in Acts. It works today.
Yeah,
because it's the truth. It's ultimate reality. The method of how we communicate it. Is it television? Is it internet? I don't care about any of that. But what we're communicating matters tremendously.
I mean, it's one of the reasons we launched a podcast as well, is to help create another resource, another outlet for truth, biblical truth, in a way that can be consumed for a modern culture.
Yeah.
And because the old way of actual consuming these kinds of discussions or resources was a midweek service on a Wednesday. Nothing wrong with that. We still do that with our youth.
Yep.
But a church-wide, like culturally speaking, over the past 70 years, a midweek church service was normal. Like that was what you did as a church.
100%.
Churches still do that, of course.
Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. They had Sunday school before church. And I remember thinking as I was a young man, I actually viewed that with a cynicism of like, man, my whole life was the church. I never had a chance to go out and engage the culture, and which sounded great as a 21-year-old, and now I'm at 53 going,
yeah, grateful for it.
I knew the word of God. Yeah. I knew it. You can't engage a culture if you're not armed. He says here, arm yourselves with this knowledge, with the same mind as Jesus. Like, arm yourselves. If you don't have that, you're toast. You're walking into a culture that's going to eat you alive. And, if for those listening, gosh, I hope I can say this without sounding like I'm a fuddy-dud. But if you're coming to church once a month, maybe rethink that strategy of what you're modeling for your children. There's an argument to be made that maybe a church, if they're not engaging and explaining clearly and explaining boldly, right, unapologetically, that maybe you shouldn't go to that church once a month. Maybe you shouldn't go to that church at all. But in a culture where you need to be armed with this, you give yourself an honest assessment of your life. Are you in the Word every day? Are you consuming, arming yourself with that knowledge? Most people don't have the discipline to do that. And so having these gatherings, again, Book of Acts, they were gathering house to house, they were gathering in big groups, small groups, but they were gathering and they were coming together. We talk about it here, Acts 2:42, 4 things, but one of them was the apostles' teaching. And there's just something about the fellowship of the saints that God designed so that it's not that we don't engage the culture, it's that we don't do it without being armed against it. I'm not saying arm yourself against your friends, against the people that don't know God. I'm talking about arming yourself and your knowledge to protect yourself from the enemy of 1 Peter 5, the devil, who would rather you absorb yourself into his culture than the other way around.
You know, I guess it's been, how many years ago, golly, since 9/11, all right? 9/11 happened. The Sunday after 9/11, so 9/11 was on a Tuesday. Isn't it amazing how we remember these things? Because it was such a traumatic day, right?
Yeah.
It was on a Tuesday. Sunday, whatever that date would have been, was the most attended Sunday church in American history.
Yeah.
I mean, so crisis draws you back. If I I don't want to make a prediction, but if I had to guess, I still feel like between now and January, something in this country is going to go sideways with this election or with whatever, global war. I don't know, but there's such a tinderbox right now, so many moving parts, that I think there's enough ingredients and enough elements in play to where the potential for an event that will drive people back to church in droves exists. And if that's true, and if that plays out, we've got to be prepared as a church and as
individuals,
community of believers, and as individuals in our own homes.
Yeah. And again, this sounds fuddy-dud, but waiting until the crisis, you're not prepared at that point. It's too late. Like you're playing catch up to it. And God cares way more about your soul than about your comfort. And he knows how human nature works. So whether he causes it or allows it, I don't know. You know, your theology might say one, might the other, but the fact is that he doesn't waste it. But wouldn't you rather be the one that was ready? Like, wouldn't you rather be the one that could be at the front of the spear instead of the last one in the ark, right? Like, wouldn't you rather be prepared now, armed now? I mean, this is such a crass analogy, but it's the only one I really know. But if you own a gun and you've never gone through training, put it away. You're going to hurt somebody with it. Like, and I'm not talking about getting your handgun permit, right? Like anybody, my 5-year-old, when he was 5, could have passed that. Like, it's nothing. Be prepared. So it's being armed with the knowledge means that you know what you're doing with God's word. If just the basic things, that's almost every letter, maybe every letter in the New Testament, there's a hinge that says therefore, right? So Ephesians 1, 2, 3, ultimate reality. This is Christ. This is your identity. This is how you came to him. The ultimate reality of the world is this. Therefore, chapter 4, verse 1. And then that's like 3 chapters of, put on the full armor of God. It's love your wives, respect your husbands, don't provoke your children to wrath. Like, those are all from the therefore. So this is the ultimate reality. This is how you live. If you don't know the ultimate reality, you don't know how to live, and you'll blow your life up. You'll end up lighting yourself on, on fire at a well house because you didn't pay attention to ultimate reality.
It's been encouraging, I guess, in a way, to hear, what you kind of brought back from this conference, hearing that there's other churches with a similar mindset.
Yeah.
Because, and we've talked about it before, obviously, but over the past 4 years, going into our 5th year since COVID.
Weird.
It was just such an intense time in where we drew some hard lines.
Yeah.
Flags in the ground.
Yeah. No rainbow flags.
No. But, dying on a hill of these specific truths, like being again, I guess, on the offense rather than on the defense, or churches playing neutral. Being on the offense, knowing that there's others out there that are also being offensive with the truth. With the truth. We've talked about it before. There's unity around a lie is delusion, right?
Yeah.
Like you've said that. And so I found some encouragement knowing we're not alone in this mindset. And I think it's going to require this remnant in our country to band and bind together so that we don't join the ranks of the insane as Marcus Aurelius stated.
Right. Written in ancient Rome, right?
Yes, like history's repeating itself.
Uh-huh.
And so what are we going to do to stay together and stay focused on the word and on the truth, not only for ourselves, but for our children, our children's children?
Yeah, I've wondered, I look back, I mean, you were there day one, you know, we both had a lot less gray hair. We both had a few less pounds. But I feel like, I mean, I didn't know any better. I don't know that any of us did. I just was doing what I thought we were supposed to do, which is tell the truth. And it actually didn't occur to me to be secret sensitive. And I still remember getting a couple emails. I mentioned abortion and they're like, oh, that's such a touchy subject. And or don't be political was one of them. Like, it's not political. That's a human rights thing. But that was 2010. Now, according to Aaron Wren, you know, the culture was still full blown in the cultural engagement. So I don't know that you'll ever hear, and I could be wrong. He preached thousands of sermons, but I don't know that you'll ever hear Tim Keller talk about abortion. Or, I mean, he's passed on to the next life, but I didn't know any better. And so for a long time, now, and honestly, it's probably more accurate that I really just sucked as a teacher. That's why the church didn't grow. But some of it, I didn't know any better. So we just told the truth.
Yeah.
But it turned out that was what, in a world built on lies, right? Telling the truth is an act of revolution. You know, in a world where there's a drought of truth, people are thirsty. But I think what's happened now, it's just made it, it's the word I'm looking for. I don't want to say easier because it's certainly not easier. But because there's so much thirst for truth. And by the way, young people.
Yeah, that's what I was getting ready to say. Is this how I know we're on the right track? Is because, you know, our youth group is not a seeker-sensitive, focused. You know, that's not the style. That's not the flavor of this youth group, and quite frankly, our young adult ministry,
right,
which is growing in leaps and bounds, because the two men that lead those groups specifically, you know, Joel Kelly is our student pastor, and Eric Newberry is our young adults pastor. I mean, they're shooting straight arrows of truth in every time they speak.
Yeah.
And there is such a thirst that those arrows are landing, and they want more. They're not looking for the fluff. They're not looking for the cotton candy version of this. That's how I think for a church to know if we're on track, if we're hitting our mark.
Yeah.
If, you know, the involvement level is if they keep coming back after shooting straight arrows.
Yeah, without having to light our hair on fire, right, and have them come watch us burn. Like they were just telling the truth.
Yeah,
like,
which was the kind of the youth group that I grew up in.
Yeah,
it's like, you know, pizza parties and you know, with an all-nighter at a local YMCA with, you know, kickball tournaments and climbing walls, and I mean, and again, there's time and place for some of that stuff.
Yeah.
But if that is the attraction, then I do believe that we missed the mark.
Yeah, because also in the 90s, again, Willie George, and there was such a noble idea here. He fired his youth pastor because his kids didn't want to go to church. Kids hated it. Kids hated youth group. And he's like, you know what? I'm going to be the youth pastor. Fired his youth pastor, and he became the youth pastor for like 3 years. By the way, the church at that point, I think, had like 3,000 people. But now as the quote-unquote youth pastor, he invested tens of millions of dollars in what he called the 180 youth program.
Wow.
And he built a facility that was the envy of every church on the planet, like rock climbing walls. You know, I mean, it was 2,000-seat state-of-the-art theater for a youth group.
Wow.
And it was busting at the seams. And so other pastors wanted to do it. And he, by the way, he patented it, whatever the word is, copyrighted it. And if you wanted to be a 180 youth group, your pastor had to fly to Tulsa with the youth pastor, spend a week, and then the pastor had to become the youth pastor for a year. And so, again, all well-intentioned stuff. And then it became like this giant, you know, competition of who could build the biggest, baddest one from Grand Rapids to Dallas.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
I remember those.
Yeah, and our bands, you know, played all those things, right? So I'm culpable in this, and you know, those facilities are gone, and the kids, you know, God only knows where they are. But I would venture to say much of the deconstruction movement, quote unquote, that we've seen was a bunch of kids that are now rejecting a Jesus that isn't the actual Jesus of the Bible because they didn't know the therefore. They didn't know the ultimate reality. So when I hear people talk often, guys that are former lead singers of bands, right, that have rejected Christ, when they describe what they're rejecting, like, oh, that's not the Bible at all. That's not Jesus, not the Jesus of the Bible. I reject that one. But they don't know because they were busy climbing rock walls. So what you see now, though, is this thirst, not for a rock wall, but for, this is a segue, the rock, Jesus, a thirst for, something foundational to build their lives on. I've seen it in my son. I'll never forget the first time the transgender thing came up. He was, I don't know, 11 or 12, and he's like, but Dad. When he gets excited, he'll say my name like 5 times, Dad. That guy has a, when you use the word for a unit, that's not a girl. He has a bleep. And I'm like, exactly. So here it is. I got a 12-year-old that can tell the difference between a man and a woman, and we got a Supreme Court justice who can't tell the difference between a woman because she's not a biologist or whatever. Like that's baloney. But if that's the world, and it is self-evident that there is fantasy and delusion around the thirst is for the truth. And as a church, we have a corner on that market. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And for my progressive Christian friends out there that say, we got to be kind and, love is patient, right? Love is kind, but it rejoices in truth. Like truth is not contradictory to love. One cannot exist without the other. And as a church, I would say that the area I need to grow in the most is the brokenhearted part. Like I need to be more brokenhearted for those that have embraced the delusion. I just get mad, because when something is just blatantly dumb, it just makes me mad. But I have to remember that the roaring lion that's coming after me is also coming after the others. So if I can grow anywhere, it's in the brokenhearted part. Like not just, I don't want to be the tent preacher of the 50s that was just ticked off, right? Sure. We need compassion in it, but our compassion cannot exist without truth.
Well, the delusion is real in America right now, across the board.
Yeah.
And it's hard to watch. There's so much delusion and insanity through every bit of multimedia that exists, that's being pumped into American homes and eyeballs and ears ad nauseum. It's really hard to watch. And so the goal is, right, for us as a church is to have these resources to be available to encourage one another, to encourage those listening, encourage ourselves that there is truth, there is sanity, there is clarity that can be found in the midst of absolute chaos worldwide.
Yeah, and that is the good news. There is an oasis of truth. Like it isn't the world around us. If anything, it should drive us to the cross, to the truth, because we have a front row seat to what the world without it looks like, and it's not good. It's harmful. It's scary. It's delusional. But the ultimate reality that we have in front of us, man, I'm grateful, and I want as many people as possible to get that. And look, I don't know what that means for us as a church in these months to come. We're already seeing something special happen. And there are other churches out there. And by the way, I have more churches coming along because more of them are beginning to sense and understand that the methodology is just not working. And so there are pastors that are repenting. I just had that conversation with a pastor of a pretty significant church that, was very repentive of his idea. He was very much in that neutral world, winsome world, and that's over for him. And by the way, the minute he began to speak truth boldly, clearly, unapologetically, that church doubled in size. And I would say, just like in the 80s, it doesn't mean that you're doing the right thing just because you have a big church. That is not the metric of success, because you can you can throw some whatever together and a bunch of people show up, but they're without any frills, they're still coming for it. Then there must be something they're thirsty for, and what they're thirsty for is truth. So with us as a church, we're going to keep doing that. Encourage you as a church family to continue to speak that. Don't censor yourself in this. And we got to make room, whatever room we got to make, whatever the methods I had, whatever ideas I had, I want a church of 800 people, whatever. Sounded great on paper, but if we've got water that's truth, how dare we shut the door to the ark if there's more people that want to get in?
Good. Glad to be back. 1 Peter chapter 4 this past Sunday. If you didn't get a chance to listen or watch that teaching, you can do so through our podcast and through our YouTube channel. If you are watching on our YouTube channel, perhaps you stumbled upon this for the first time, go ahead and subscribe so you can get the updates as we upload each and every week. 1 Peter chapter 5 this Sunday. Darren will be leading us in that. Thank you for joining us on the Deeper Podcast. We look forward to touching base with you again next week.